ever here on Dynamite Danger Cat. I'm going to go over the way that I build my character, the way that I choose my gear and put my builds together, at least the concepts and the theories behind it, and explain how they work and why. Now, first of all, the reason that I'm doing this is not to be the be-all, end-all of this concept, because there's a lot of ways to go about it. But who this is for people that are not interested in doing raids, are not interested in challenge modes, and are not interested in elite ranked PvP. If those things are not on your radar for things you want to do, then this approach can work for you pretty well. This is for people that are doing open world stuff, that are running around and doing boss trains, that are doing story things for achievements, or that dabble in the other areas, but not to a high degree, that do low-level fractals, that will go and just do some casual PvP to get the daily done. This is the type of person that this is meant for. If you're trying to use what I'm going to tell you here and get into raid groups, you're going to have a bad time. So keep that in mind, and let's get going with this. The first thing I want to explain is something called stat budgets. So let's take a look at some gear. Let's look at hats. No, not aquatic hats, regular hats. And we want to match my level and go to exotic. Now, the numbers will be different from one piece of gear to another, or from one slot to another, but the concept holds true everywhere. So if we take a look at this Berserker's Helm, we have 3 stats here, and then on the one I have equipped, we have 4 stats. If you do the math, the ones with 3 stats have a budget of 146. The 3 stats will always add up to 146. The ones with 4 stats will always add up to 158. So if you go and do the math comparatively for each different slot, you're going to find that the more stats it has, the more stats it has. So the greater variety of stats, the more total stat budget it has. But the difference is that you don't ever have as much in a single stat. For example, the power would be the high stat on these racing goggles that I have. But the Apothecary's Helm has got 60 in healing power. That's its high stat. Or if we look at the 60 power versus 51 power. So the Berserkers are still going to get you the most raw damage output. Another good comparison would be Berserkers and Marauders, which is, Marauders is basically Berserkers, but it adds in some vitality. It's still not as much DPS as Berserkers, even though it has more stats, but it does have more survivability. So that's how a stat budget works. Keep that in mind. The next thing to pay attention to is what brings value to a build. And that can be put into a few different categories. The first one is damage output, and we can break that down a little more, but damage is one valuable thing a build can have, whether solo or... Who is talking? There is nowhere in this game where someone doesn't talk in the background. Anyway, the other things that a build can bring that are valuable are providing boons, or putting conditions out, having a lot of break bar damage to CC bosses and get that extra damage window, survivability, healing, generally things like that. And you categorize it into 2 groups. You've got support and you've got DPS. DPS do more damage. Support provide one of the other things. Ideally, any good build is going to do more than just one thing, and the more different things you can do, the worse you can afford to be at any one of them. And so what we're looking at here and how I do this is kind of a jack-of-all-trades approach. If you look at that thing that I talked about with stat budget, and we go here and look at the Celestial Emblazoned Helm, well, it doesn't have 60 in anything. It doesn't even have 51, but it has 28 in 9 stats. And so if the 3 stat budget is 146, the 4 stat budget is 158, a 9 stat budget is 252. That's more than 100 stat budget higher than the 3 stat bonus. And so if you're looking for just raw stats, Celestial is going to be the way to go. Now, the big question is, can your build, the class you are, or well, profession, the specs that you've chosen, the traits that you choose, and the runes and sigils and your skills, do all of them make enough use of each of these additional stats to make them more valuable overall than just specializing in one thing? Because if you're going for strike damage, nothing is going to beat the Berserker's stuff, because it is the 3 strike damage stats in the highest values you can get them. However, if you take a look, well, 56 power, 40 precision, 40 ferocity. And if we go here, we've got 28 power, 28 precision, 28 ferocity. So that's already half the power and a little more than half of those other 2 stats. But in addition, we're getting the same thing with condition damage and condition duration. We're also getting boon duration, which is more DPS. We're getting healing power and vitality and toughness, which are survivability. So what we can do by doing it this way is we don't need to worry about as much survivability coming from other things. So we don't need survivability from our traits. We don't need them from our specs. We don't need them as much from our utility skills, because we're going to be getting extra value for survivability just from the stats we have. And same thing with runes and sigils. And so we keep that in mind when we're building this, so that we sacrifice as little damage as possible, because that's really what the most important thing is. And we spread ourselves a little wider without really dropping the ball on any one thing. And so let me switch into a more regular everyday spec and set of gear. So if you take a look here, this is the main set of gear that I run around with most of the time if I'm using Mechanist. I'm going to put this guy away. And you'll see that I'm running full Celestial and Divinity runes, because it does the same thing. It is just a bonus to every stat. The value of doing it this way is that this gear, no matter what I spec to do, no matter how I change it, works. And I can try pretty much any build that I want, and I'm going to get a similar result for what I'm doing. Same thing with these guys over here. It's all Celestial. And my weapons are Celestial. Now, what I've put in here for my sigils are cleansing, condition cleanse, and boon duration, because I found that for the way I tend to spec things, that works really well. But let's talk a little bit about how we spec things. I'm going to go over to yet another build and show you how I put this together. This is my flamethrower build for when I want to go all Deathwing on things. And let's take a look at how synergy works. So let's take a look. Might here, might is condition damage and extra power. That's really good. And so might is good for both condition damage and power. This build has equal amounts of stats toward both of those. If you take a look at here, all my stats are really close and pretty even on everything that's going on here. So I also have a lot of boon duration, and I need more of that because I want the boons to last, hence the Sigil of Concentration. And so if you take a look here at some synergy, this trait gives me might whenever I have a flamethrower. So if I turn my flamethrower on, I'm just going to start stacking up might. And it's going to last longer per stack because of how much boon duration I have. So that turns the concentration from my Celestial gear into more DPS, because it's increasing my strike damage and my condition damage and my condition duration and my crit damage and my crit chance all at once. Instead of focusing on just one of those things or just a couple, it's doing all of them. And so because of this, gain might when you have a flamethrower. That's really great. Might gains increased duration. And then I've also got this one. Gain might when you have stability. Well, this also gives me stability. And so I've kind of got this feedback loop of might and stability. This is why they nerfed the flamethrower. Because I'm standing here, and I'm rotating through 2 stacks of stability and 17 to 18 stacks of might, just for holding the flamethrower in my hands. And so this is all built around boon duration. The other thing that I've got is this stuff that gives me quickness whenever I throw super speed on something, and it also gives me more concentration on top of my power. And so that's really nice. So even more concentration, which is what helps. This also makes me do more damage when I have stability. So it's pretty great. Now this is strike damage, but I don't care because I'm doing both kinds of damage. So this also says that I do more damage when I have swiftness. Super speed is provided with some of these things here, and I'll use it as much as I can, but what about swiftness? Well, if I've gone in here, this gives me swiftness whenever I equip an engineering kit. And so I'm going to be cycling in and out of this anyway to get these stacks of burning, because it does strike damage and a lot of burning. And so every 12 or so seconds, I'm flipping this back on, which gives me swiftness. So not only do I keep stability and swiftness on all the time and super speed a lot of the time, but that's also increasing my strike damage by, 5%? 5% each time. So that's straight up 10% damage most of the time and an extra 5% damage here and there when I do super speed. But this also gives me some quickness, and because of all my boon duration, they last even longer. Now here's the really fun part. This is a thing called Kinetic Battery, which gives super speed and quickness. Well, super speed gives quickness, so this makes the quickness last longer. Anytime I push any of these buttons, it gives me charges of this until it reaches its 5 stacks and I get more quickness. And so I'm pushing these buttons on cooldown all the time. Not always this guy, just because I like to save him to res people. But I'm just pushing these buttons all the time and cycling in and out of this, and that's the build. That's the whole thing. Now the benefit to this is it is trying to utilize all of those different stats. There are some things in here that do some really nice self-healing, and there's things that do strike damage, there's things that do condition damage. And so this makes full use of every stat that those celestial pieces of gear provide. And that's really the secret. Now, the classes that I can see that that can apply this concept the best are the E classes, Engineer and Elementalist, because almost everything either of those classes is doing is providing both condition damage and strike damage at the same time, and tends to do with quite a bit of boons. I would say if you break it into 4 pieces, you have condition damage, strike damage, boons, and survivability, like healing or having vitality or getting stats inherited from it. As long as you can hit 3 of those 4 with what you're doing on a regular basis with your build, meaning what your traits and stuff are and what your skills are, then it's worth it to go the celestial route. Now, why would anybody care to do this instead of having a bunch of different sets of gear? It's because gear is expensive, or at least making ascended gear is. And so what I've done is I have made celestial ascended gear, and I just run divinity runes, and then I can go as crazy as I want and not have to worry about anything but damage with my skills, and it works, and it works really well. In my Mechanist build, for example, if I go over here, it is not hard in even solo for me to put out 9 to 10,000 DPS with this build with no outside help. When there's a group of people and I'm getting buffs from them, then it's even better. I'm also providing almost 100% uptime alacrity with this, and so it's beneficial to a group because I'm providing boons to them. But this is really the core of it, is you're going jack of all trades. You just need to make sure that the way you're using it fits in multiple categories. Otherwise, if you're doing no condition damage, then a quarter of the stats that are going, or that you're getting from that celestial gear, are just going to waste. And so if you're building for something that's pure strike, it's just really not going to work as well. And so here's what I've done in that case. This is my scrapper build for damage and for kind of being a little tanky and providing quickness. This is a quickness DPS scrapper build. And it's a little different. I've got a few pieces of Marauder in here, which is sacrificing some condition damage, and it's focusing on boon duration and strike damage. I've also got these because I just had the extra budget to get more of these things. The rest of this is all the same celestial gear, but this is where I've focused on power and precision for this specific set of gear, because if you take a look at... Oh, it's still in there. If you take a look at this build, where's the important parts of this? It's this one, which is increased strike damage. It's this, which is the percentage of the strike damage you get. And so I kind of wanted to focus on more strike damage. Plus, I guess I should have my hammer. If you take a look at this, there's really not condition damage on this weapon. And so I am focusing more on strike and giving up 1/3 of that equation, and it works out pretty well. The other thing I get from doing it this way is a decent amount of toughness, so it makes it so that I can tank things, because that's part of the way that that aggro works in this game. And so you can tweak it a little bit just by adjusting some stuff. The easy thing to do is, if you've got Living World Season 3, just get different sets of these. Just get different accessories for whatever different build you want to get. It doesn't take that long to get a full set of 6 from just going around and doing those maps and getting the currencies. And then switch these out and let the Celestial gear take care of the rest of it. If you can get different things from weapons, even if they're exotic, that works too, and it makes you flexible enough, as long as you're hitting 3 out of 4 of those areas with what the Celestial gear can do. So that's the overall core concept to what I'm doing. Another couple of pieces of advice for doing this is to take a look at what other people are going to be bringing. If you tend to run around in a group, then look at what's popular right now. For example, alacrity and quickness are really popular. A lot of people are building around that, and so you can expect to have someone else providing them at least a little. And so that's why with my Mechanist build, I'm just really not concerned about having 100% uptime on alacrity. Instead, I go for some more DPS options. Instead of having this guy that puts out barrier, which creates alacrity, I took this because then it makes all of... I'm like a total noob. I'm running 5 signets because it's easy. And so I'm giving up more alacrity so that I can have the convenience of more movement speed all the time, and shorter cooldowns, and stronger damage bonus from this. I still have a lot of alacrity, but I can count on other people being there to supplement it a bit. Same thing for quickness, or sometimes you'll have other people providing a bunch of healing. Whatever it is, just pay attention to what is popular so you can know what you don't need to provide. Right now, it seems like providing 25 stacks of might is a pretty valuable thing because not a lot of people are playing builds that do that. Fury is another one that is just... everybody's got Fury. This build doesn't, but many other builds have Fury. Anything that an engineer is doing is going to have just Fury coming out the nose. There's going to be tons of it. Look at this guy. Fury all the time. 6.25 seconds with an 8-second cooldown. So I've got like an 80% uptime on Fury, and that's just from what I do myself. If I want more of it, I push this, and then all of a sudden I've just got Fury everywhere, but this actually works out to be a little more. So keep in mind what is popular and what other people are doing as you formulate your build, and have a few different builds so that you can switch around, because that's the other thing that doing your gear this way gives you the freedom to do, is to change things around a bit without totally needing to get a full new set of gear. So it's also going to make it so that you don't die as much, because a lot of people are going to go full Berserker, or they're going to go full Vipers or something, and just stack those DPS stats and try to count on dodge rolling perfectly or other people to keep themselves alive. If you can survive a hit by forgetting to dodge in a lot of cases, then you're not going to be dead. And dead DPS do no damage. So also, somebody needs to stop and help res you. Whereas if you can be the guy that helps res someone else, then you're the hero and they're the one that needed your help. So survivability can be more valuable than DPS stats in cases where you're not going to be playing perfectly. Another thing you can do to kind of figure out where the reality lies with that, which is uncomfortable to do, by the way. It's not fun. But go and do some of the bigger metas, like the Chalk one in Tangled Depths, or the Jade Sea meta that we're not supposed to say by name yet at the end, or any of the ones in End of Dragons, really, and take a look at how you do on the bigger boss fights. And maybe keep a tally right now every time you're in a down state during any of those things. Go do a couple hours of events and see when do you ever get in a down state? When are you ever dangerously low on health? Figure that out and be honest with yourself about it and see, for the amount of time you were in a down state or how often it happened, would a little more survivability have kept you alive? In most cases, it would have, and in those cases, you can sacrifice a pretty good portion of the damage you're doing in order to not be put in a down state. It's something that can be a little eye-opening and definitely a little humbling if you take the time to really pay attention to it. I'm not doing this very well. He's going to charge in a minute and get out of the range of my fun stuff. I guess I can turn on damage for this. But even not doing this very well and standing in everything, it doesn't matter because I've got so much self-healing with this build that the things built into my spec, because whenever I enter or leave Hollow Forge, I get some healing. The stuff just built right into my spec takes care of all of that. That's the beauty of doing it this way, is it gives you a lot of survivability just built right in. I've got almost 30,000 health, and so percentage-based healing things are going to be that much more powerful. And I've got a ton of self-healing and a lot of toughness, and so everything's doing way less damage in the first place. My regen's going to last longer. It's going to be more powerful depending on what other stuff I have. And so I can be really casual and kind of lazy with how I do all of this, and it works really well. So if you're looking for something that's a little more forgiving, a little less intensity, but still gets the job done, things like this can be really great. You're not going to be putting up super, super high numbers on everything, but you're also not going to be the dead guy. And so, like I said, if you're somebody who's looking to raid or who's looking to do elite high-level PvP, you're probably already somebody who doesn't need to hear anything I'm talking about right here. And you really shouldn't be doing it this way. But if you're just a regular person who wants to get by in the game and doesn't want to have to maintain several sets of gear to be flexible, then this is a good way to go. If anyone has any questions or wants me to go over any of my engineer builds specifically, then leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like to see or what would help you. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope that this helps the people like me who are quite a bit more casual find an easy way to make the things they have available to them work the best that they can. Okay, thanks, bye.